People liked to say a name was a shelter, but Arabella had learned the opposite. In places ruled by fear, a name became a handle someone else used to drag you where they wanted. Duty, debt, blood, rank, purity, obedience. All those polished words were only iron dressed up for ceremony. The first lesson of Blackridge Keep was that kindness could be rationed. The second was that mercy could be revoked before sunrise. The third arrived when they tore her locket from beneath her collar and decided, all at once, that she had become dangerous. At first light, two kennel guards hauled her through the servants' passage by the elbows, boots scraping over cold stones still damp from night fog. Ash from the upper hearths drifted through the courtyard in gray ribbons, clinging to sweat and tears until every face looked carved from soot. She had not slept. Her wrists were raw where old restraint leather had rubbed for years, and her knuckles were split from scrubbing frozen troughs with bare hands. Someone had rung the household bell before dawn, summoning the kitchen workers, stable boys, laundresses, and guards to watch. The steward stood on the low stair beneath the keep's iron crest, black robe belted tight, silver tally rod in one hand. He held her moon-sealed locket in the other, pinched between finger and thumb as if it were diseased. "Where did you steal this?" he asked. Arabella tasted blood where she had bitten her cheek. "It was my mother's." Laughter moved through the courtyard, thin and mean. "You had no mother," said one of the older maids, not meeting Arabella's eyes. "You were dropped at the trade gate with a chain tag." The steward lifted the locket higher so everyone could see the crescent seal pressed into the metal. "This mark belongs to a bloodline barred from this territory. You hid contraband at your throat for years and wore loyalty in your mouth while carrying treason on your skin." She shook her head once, because too much movement made the world tilt. "I carried memory, not treason." His expression sharpened. "Memory is a luxury for citizens. You are bonded labor." He nodded to the branding man. The man approached with a flat iron head glowing dull orange. Panic flashed bright and total, but Arabella forced her feet to stay planted even when heat brushed her cheek. She had seen this done to stable thieves and deserters. Not deep enough to kill. Just deep enough to make sure everyone knew what they were allowed to do to you forever afterward. "Mark her wrist," the steward said. "Thief." A hush settled over the workers. No one stepped forward. No one spoke against it. A child from the scullery pressed both hands over his ears. Arabella heard herself say very quietly, "I did not steal." The steward's gaze slid over her torn sleeves, her old collar scar, the chain ring still bolted beside the cellar hatch. "Blood-tainted and lying. Return her to the lower vault after the mark. Double rations to the hounds. They track at noon." That sentence cracked the numbness she had carried for years. Noon meant they were not punishing her. They were preparing a hunt. Inside her mind, one hard, clear thought rose above terror. "If I go below now, I do not come back up. This is the end they chose for me, and if I obey, I help them do it." The branding man reached for her arm. She twisted, driven by pure refusal, and his iron hissed against cobble instead of flesh. The nearest guard struck her shoulder with a baton, and pain exploded down her side. She stumbled, dropped to one knee, came up again with ash in her lungs and rage in her mouth. The steward shouted for restraint chains. A kennel hound began to bark, sharp and frantic, reacting to her fear scent. Then a stable hand named Toma, who had once slipped her a heel of bread in winter, made the smallest gesture with his chin toward the west gate. He did not look at her. He just said loudly for the steward to hear, "Cellar key is not on the hook." The lie bought 3 heartbeats of confusion. 3 was enough. Arabella drove her elbow backward into a guard's ribs and ran. She did not run cleanly. She lurched, half fell, caught herself on the well ring, and sprinted through the smokehouse lane with one arm locked around her side. Men shouted. Someone blew a short horn from the watchtower. She cut left through the laundry yard, ducked beneath a rope of frozen sheets, and slammed through the stable door hard enough to rattle the hinges. Horses screamed at the noise. Steam rose from their flanks in pale clouds. Her vision narrowed to fragments: hanging bridles, stacked oats, a dropped curry comb, frost lacing the stall beams. She grabbed the first knife she saw from the tack bench, short-bladed and plain, the kind used for cutting feed twine. She jammed it into her boot, fingers shaking. Bootsteps thundered outside. She chose the meanest mare in Black Ridge, a smoke gray with one torn ear and a temper everyone cursed. Arabella had fed her through fever and stood with her through storm panic. The mare rolled one eye toward her and stamped. "Please," Arabella whispered, pressing her forehead briefly to the horse's neck. "Just once, carry me." A fist pounded the stable door. She threw the latch on the rear postern, hauled herself bareback onto the mare, and kicked. The horse launched into the ravine track like a loosed arrow, iron shoes striking sparks from rock. Cold wind sliced tears from Arabella's eyes before she realized she was crying. Behind them, the alarm horn rose again, long this time, joined by the baying of hounds released too early. By dawn's middle hour she had crossed the charcoal pits and entered Wolfwood ravines, where pines crowded so close the sky became narrow bands of silver. Branches whipped her face. Her shoulder throbbed in time with the mare's stride. Twice she thought she heard riders flanking her, but it was only echo and fear bouncing between stone walls. Once a cult sentry in black stitched leathers appeared on a ridge above, rune torch in hand, then vanished as the trail dropped into fog. She knew those sentries. They were never listed on household rosters, never seen at market, always present when someone disappeared. The mare slipped on frost at a stream crossing, regained footing, and pushed on. Arabella tasted iron and bile. Hunger hit like a blade. She had eaten nothing since yesterday's dusk crust. Her hands were numb around the horse's mane. The locket, reclaimed in the scramble and now hidden beneath her torn shift again, thudded against her sternum with each jolt, a tiny weight that felt heavier than chain. I keep breathing. I keep moving. I do not turn back. The present tense inside her skull steadied her when the path blurred. I am not their seller. I am not their mark. I am still here. 3 days earlier, she had heard 2 guards in the grain room whispering about Ashford border patrols tightening for some council dispute. At the time, it had sounded like distant weather. Now it became direction. West meant Ashford land and Ashford law. However cold, might still be law. By the time the sun cleared the upper ridges, pale as old bone, the mare staggered. Arabella slid off before they both went down, whispered gratitude into the torn ear, and slapped the horse's flank toward a thicket where she might hide. Then Arabella kept moving on foot, one hand against tree trunks for balance, until carved boundary stones emerged through the mist. A wolf sigil over crossed spears, worn by decades of rain. She reached the first Ashford outpost half-frozen, mud to her knees, hair matted with ash. 2 gatekeepers in dark cloaks lowered spears at once. "Stop where you stand," one barked. "Name and rank." "Arabella Duskwalker," she said, voice breaking. "No rank. I seek sanctuary under border law." The second guard looked her over, taking in torn servant cloth, bruised wrists, and the collar scar she could never hide. His mouth hardened. "Runaway labor from Black Ridge, not our burden. I was accused falsely. They mean to kill me." She swallowed hard. "Please, let me speak to your captain." "We are not a refuge for every household dispute." She took one step forward before she could stop herself. Spears crossed at her throat. She raised empty hands immediately, breathing shallow against the point. A third guard came from the watch hut and sniffed the air once, expression turning wary. "She carries old blood scent," he muttered. "Could be bait." Then bind me and test me, Arabella said. Do not send me back. The first gatekeeper gave a short, humorless laugh. You think we open for tears? Her legs trembled so badly she had to lock her knees to stay upright. Behind the outpost walls, she heard hounds in the distance again, faint but coming. The wind shifted east, carrying smoke and the metallic reek of rune oil. Blackridge hunters were still on her trail. Please, she said again, softer now, because desperation had no dignity left to lose. I will work. I will sleep in your stables. I only need one day where no one owns my breath. The guards exchanged a look she could not read. Pity, maybe. Disgust, maybe. Procedure, certainly. No entry, the first said. He stepped back and lifted his horn. The blast rolled across the ravine like a blade of sound, summoning authority she could neither fight nor flee, and every guard at the outpost straightened as mounted riders approached through the mist under the black and amber banner of Raven Ashford. The riders broke through the mist in a disciplined wedge, hooves striking frozen earth in a rhythm that felt less like travel and more like judgment arriving. Black leather, fur-lined collars, spears tipped in dark steel, wolf sigils burned into their pauldrons in amber thread that caught the weak morning light. Arabella could barely keep them in focus. Her knees shook hard enough that her teeth clicked. The horn's echo still rolled along the ravine walls, and every sound seemed sharpened by fatigue. Tack creaking, bridles chiming, a horse snorting steam into cold air. At their center rode a man on a towering black warhorse, broad-shouldered beneath a storm-dark cloak, clasped with silver. He did not move like the others. No restless scanning, no show of authority, no wasted motion. He sat with the stillness of someone obeyed long before he spoke. The guards at the gate lowered their heads almost imperceptibly as he drew near, and that tiny, coordinated shift told Arabella more than any title could have. Alpha. No, she realized, as the banner snapped once in the wind above him, watching the way even seasoned riders held a careful distance from his mount. More than that. The first gatekeeper stepped forward and bowed from the waist. Alpha Raven, border petitioner from Blackridge side, claims sanctuary, carries old blood scent, no marks of pack allegiance visible. The man on the warhorse said nothing at first. His gaze settled on Arabella, and the world narrowed to the weight of being assessed by someone who could choose her fate in one breath. He looked younger than she had expected for a ruler whispered about in grain room rumors, maybe early 30s. But there was nothing untested in him. A pale scar crossed one side of his jaw into his beard shadow. Rings of old command sat in the way he held his spine, the way his hands rested loose on the reins, ready without seeming tense. The wind brought his scent to her, clean and cold and metallic, like rain striking iron railings before a storm. Name, he said. His voice carried without volume, low and rough-edged, and every wolf at the outpost went quiet. Arabella Duskwalker, she answered. Her throat felt scraped raw. I request sanctuary under Ashford border law. Rank? None. That word hung there, naked as a wound. One of the mounted riders, younger, with a nicked brow and distrust written plain in his expression, leaned in his saddle. Blackridge sentries have crossed near the lower ridge twice this month. This could be a planted distraction. Arabella turned toward him because humiliation had burned through fear until only stubbornness remained. If I were sent to deceive you, they would have fed me first. A flicker crossed two riders' faces, almost humor, gone quickly. The Nick Brow rider looked irritated by it. Raven's gaze did not leave her. Show me your hands. She lifted them. Bruised knuckles, split skin. Rope burns old and new layered over each other like a map of years she would rather forget. His jaw tightened once. Turn your wrists. She obeyed. The collar scar at her throat throbbed where cold air touched it. the stable knife pressed against her ankle in her boot, a hard reminder that she still had one small edge left if this became another cage. The first gatekeeper spoke, careful now. Alpha, by protocol we can hold her outside the walls until council review. Outside the walls, where Black Ridge hounds could scent her by dusk. Arabella swayed, her vision grayed at the edges. She locked her knees again and hated that he would see it. Raven dismounted in one smooth movement, boots landing softly despite his size. The warhorse stamped and tossed its head, then settled when he touched its neck. He crossed the distance between them slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal he had no intention of cornering. No one else moved. From this close she saw details she had missed: dark hair tied back with a leather cord, hands scarred across the knuckles, the faint shimmer of pack runes beneath the cuff of his glove. His eyes were not soft. They were precise, watchful, unsettling in their directness. He stopped just beyond arm's reach. Arabella forced herself not to step back. Every lesson Black Ridge had carved into her body screamed at once. Powerful men close meant pain. Questions meant traps. Stillness meant impact coming. Raven inhaled. The sharp intake was almost soundless, but the effect rippled outward. His shoulders went rigid. His pupils widened in a single sudden flare, and amber bled into his irises like fire lit beneath glass. The nearest riders straightened in alarm, hands dropping toward weapon hilts without drawing. The Nick-brow rider whispered, "Alpha?" Heat struck Arabella's chest so abruptly she gasped. Not outside heat. Inside, beneath bone, a fierce pulse that answered his breath as if her body had been waiting for that exact moment to remember something ancient. Her skin prickled from throat to fingertips. The locket under her shift turned searing hot against her sternum. She clutched at the torn fabric and found she could not look away from him. Tension snapped taut across the outpost yard like a drawn bowstring. Raven spoke without turning his head. "Lower your spears." No one argued. Steel points dropped, though unease remained thick as smoke. Arabella heard her own breathing, thin and fast, heard a distant hound call from the eastern ridge, heard the blood in her ears. The man in front of her looked as stunned as she felt, and that frightened her more than hostility would have. Hostility she understood. This, she did not. I should run. I should run now, while they are confused, while his men are watching him instead of me, while my legs still answer. But I am so tired I could sleep standing. I am so hungry I can smell oats inside their stables, and hate myself for wanting them. His scent is in my lungs, and every warning I own is shouting at once. This is danger. This is command. This is the shape of another chain. Then why does my chest answer him like a second heartbeat has started inside it? Why does the space between us feel like a door I have already stepped through? I do not belong to him. I do not belong to anyone. I will not kneel. I will not beg. I will not offer my throat just because my body remembers something my mind does not trust. Raven took one measured breath, then another, visibly forcing control into his frame. The amber in his gaze did not fade. "What did Black Ridge accuse you of?" he asked, voice rougher now. "Stealing this." Her fingers shook as she drew the moon-sealed locket into view. Silver crescent, dented at one edge, chain darkened with age. Gasps moved through two guards at once. One muttered a prayer to the moon in a hoarse whisper. Raven looked at the locket, and a new kind of tension crossed his face, old recognition layered over immediate shock. "Who gave it to you?" "My mother, before she died." The answer came automatically, a truth worn smooth from years of saying it to herself in darkness, where no one could mock it. He lifted his hand, then stopped halfway, palm open, asking without words. Arabella hesitated, then placed the locket in his glove. Their fingers brushed. A low thrum built in her chest and raced up her spine. Not pain, not relief. A pull so fierce it made her knees buckle, Raven caught her elbow before she hit the ground, his grip firm and careful at once. The contact slammed through both of them. He closed his eyes for half a heartbeat like someone struck by sunlight after years underground. His wolf surfaced through his gaze, ancient and possessive and barely leashed, and several riders took involuntary steps backward. By the moon, the first gatekeeper breathed. Is it true? Raven opened his eyes and looked straight into Arabella's. Mate, he said, and the single word landed like a bell note through stone. The outpost seemed to hold its breath. Frost wind moved her hair across her face. Raven's hand remained at her elbow, steadying without trapping. Arabella felt panic surge, fierce and bright, because she had spent 10 years being owned by people who called it order. And now fate itself stood in front of her wearing an alpha's face and asking her to believe that this was different. Do not, she whispered. Not sure if she meant do not claim me or do not let me fall apart. His expression shifted, grief and fury and restraint cutting through one another in a look so naked it made her chest ache. No one touches you without your consent, he said, loud enough for every guard to hear. Not here. Not ever again. Behind them, another horn sounded from the eastern ridge, closer this time, followed by the distant bay of hunting hounds crossing into Ashford boundary fog. Raven did not break eye contact. Arabella Duskwalker, he said, each syllable deliberate, step inside my territory. She stared at him, at the amber fire in his eyes, at the open gate behind his shoulder, at the line between hunted and sheltered carved into frozen ground, and knew with terrifying clarity that one step would change every law that had governed her life. She stepped. The boundary stone passed her left shoulder, and the instant her boot crossed onto Ashford soil, Raven turned with lethal efficiency. Gate sealed. Eastern Ridge riders with me. Jory, take 6 and cut off the hounds before they scent the upper road. No kills unless they strike first. I want Black Ridge turned back at the markers and recorded. Orders broke his guard into motion. Chains rattled, timber groaned, iron teeth slid into place across the outpost gate. The horn sounded again, this time in Ashford cadence, 3 short calls that meant incursion and witness required. Arabella swayed where she stood, trying to hold herself upright while the world tilted in slow, nauseating arcs. Raven looked back at her, command still hard in his posture, and his voice changed when he spoke to her. Stay with me. She tried to answer and failed. Her knees gave out. He caught her before she struck the frozen ground, one arm behind her back, the other bracing her shoulders. His grip was powerful enough to pin a fighter, but he only steadied, never forcing her closer than necessary. Arabella's breath came in thin pulls against the cold, and the unfamiliar heat still beating through her ribs from the bond recognition. Do you consent to being moved? He asked quietly. The question landed harder than the fall had. Men like him did not ask girls like her anything. They took, renamed, and called that mercy. She managed a hoarse, yes. He lifted her then, efficient and careful, and carried her through the inner gate toward the keep road while mounted scouts thundered past in the opposite direction. Her cheek brushed his cloak, dense wool smelling of rain, leather oil, and winter air. She hated that her body noticed comfort before her mind allowed trust. The Ashford Keep rose from the ravine like dark slate carved into terraces, towers linked by covered walks, defensive walls banded in ironwood. No banners of ornament, no gilded vanity, built for weather and war, built to outlast siege. They entered through a side court where stable hands froze mid-stride and lowered their eyes as Raven passed with a stranger in his arms. He did not take her to his chambers. He took her to the infirmary tower. The relief was so sharp it almost hurt. Inside, heat rolled from banked hearthstones and braziers set with clean coal rather than refuse ash. Shelves lined the circular chamber. Folded linens, dried herbs, sealed jars, boiled instruments laid in neat rows. 3 healers moved at once when Raven stepped in. A gray-haired woman with ink stains on her fingers, a broad-shouldered man carrying bandage wraps, and a young apprentice with a basin already steaming. "Out," Raven said. The apprentice blinked. "Alpha, her condition may require stitch work. We should—" "Out, all of you. Leave water, antiseptic, food. No one enters until I call." The gray-haired healer held his gaze a beat longer than the others. "If she declines, you send for me immediately." "I will." They withdrew, doors closing behind them with a muted thud. Silence settled, punctuated only by the hiss of steam and Arabella's uneven breathing. Raven lowered her onto the edge of a low cot. He stepped back at once, giving her space, then removed his gloves and set them on the table beside the basin. Scars cross-hatched both hands, old white lines over darker healed cuts. "I am going to wash your hands," he said. "If anything hurts beyond what you can bear, tell me and I stop." Arabella stared at him, waiting for the hook behind the kindness. It did not come. He knelt in front of her instead of taking the chair. Alpha of Ashford, on stone, at her feet, sleeves rolled to forearms marked with faint runic lines that pulsed once and stilled. He dipped a clean cloth in warm water and touched her split knuckles with the care of someone handling a wing-broken bird. Dirt and dried blood loosened in pink swirls across the basin. He did not flinch at the brutality written in her skin. He did not ask for confession, lineage proof, or gratitude. When she hissed through her teeth at a deeper cut, he paused. "This one needs binding pressure, 2 breaths." She nodded. He worked, the knot behind her ribs, tight for years, loosened by a fraction she did not trust. "I am sitting in a tower where no one has bolted the door. I am wearing an Alpha's cloak over my shoulders because I am shaking, and he saw it and did not turn that weakness into leverage. I keep waiting for the price. There is always a price. Food has a price. Warmth has a price. Being spoken to like a person has a price that comes due when no witnesses are left. If I sleep, I wake in a cellar. If I soften, I lose the edge that kept me breathing. Yet he asked to touch me. He asked. The word keeps circling in my chest like a moth around flame. Maybe this is another cage with softer walls. Maybe it is not. I do not know how to stand in that uncertainty without trembling." Raven wrapped linen around her right wrist, then the left. Secure, but not tight. He reached for a ceramic cup of broth, drank first, then held it toward her. No sedatives. Bone stock, salt, ginger. You need heat before argument. Argument? Her voice rasped. Council will convene by noon whether I permit it or not. His mouth tightened. Half of them already think you are a threat. The other half think you are an opportunity. She took the cup with both hands. The first swallow made her stomach cramp. The second settled warmer. He watched her drink as if counting each breath she kept. "Why dismiss the healers?" she asked after a moment. "You could have ordered them to handle me and been done with it." "I could have." He leaned back against the stone, forearms on his knees, gaze fixed on the hearth for a beat before returning to her. "When a wolf is cornered, too many hands feel like attack. I did not need a lesson to see that in you. I had one anyway." She waited. "My mother was paraded through councils when I was young, questioned while bleeding after a border raid, because no one trusted a queen born outside their line. They called it procedure." The words were flat, controlled, and far older than his face. "Procedure can be cruelty in formal clothing. I do not repeat what I watched." Arabella held his gaze. No theatrics, no plea for sympathy. Just a statement laid down like a boundary stone. He reached to the table, picked up her moon-sealed locket where he had placed it, and offered it back. "This remains yours." She closed her fingers over it, chain pooling cold into her palm. A knock sounded. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. Military precise. Raven did not rise. Speak. A guard's voice came through the door. Eastern report. Blackridge hounds turned back at marker 4. 2 sentries detained for crossing with rune torches. They carry letters sealed with Ashford wax. Forged. Arabella's pulse jumped. Raven's expression went still in a dangerous way. Hold them under witness. No interrogations without record. Yes, Alpha. Footsteps receded. He finally stood and moved to the window slit, checking the courtyard below. When he spoke again, his tone softened by a degree. You are safe in this room until I say otherwise. If anyone enters without my order, you shout once. I will hear it. You cannot hear across a keep. He glanced back at her, amber threading faintly through his irises again, a reminder of the predator and king inhabiting one skin. Try me. By the time the keep bell tolled noon, word had outrun stone and rank, and every corridor hummed with the same question spoken behind half-closed doors. What had the Alpha brought home from the border? Raven returned with 2 cloaks, one dark for himself, one lined in fur for her. He stopped an arm's length away. Council chamber. You may stand behind me, beside me, or not enter. Your choice. She looked at the door, at the narrow window, at the cup still warm in her hands, then at him. Beside you, she said. The chamber was carved into the keep's central spine, high vaulted and severe, a ring of blackwood seats descending toward a circular floor inlaid with old law runes. Elders lined the tiers in layered ceremonial cloaks, silver torque collars marking office and age. Warriors stood at the perimeter with spear butts grounded. The moment Arabella entered at Raven's side, conversation died. Then it began again in sharpened whispers. Blackridge servant. Look at the collar scar. Moon seal at her throat. Enchantment. A council elder with braided white hair and a hawk-beak profile leaned forward. Alpha Raven, this woman carries prohibited bloodmark insignia and triggered a bond response in public view under border stress. Containment is indicated. Cage pending investigation. Another elder, broad-faced, voice heavy with contempt, spoke over him. She should be stripped and rune-tested before she poisons succession. We cannot let one gutter-born stray unmake our law. Arabella's nails bit into her palm until pain steadied her. She had heard versions of this her entire life. Different room, same verdict waiting. Raven descended 2 steps into the chamber center. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. No claw touches the woman under my protection. The words struck like iron dropped on stone. His alpha aura rolled outward, invisible but palpable, pressure changing in the lungs, instinct forcing even stubborn elders to brace against it. Several warriors lowered their heads without realizing they had moved. The broad-faced elder recovered first, cheeks flushing. Protection is not exemption. You jeopardize pack stability for a scent reaction. If she has bewitched you... He never finished. Raven turned his head just enough for the chamber to see the amber brightening in his gaze, predator surfacing beneath discipline. Say that again with evidence, Elder Corvin. Not rumor. Not fear dressed as wisdom. Evidence. Corvin swallowed. Silence spread. The white-haired elder tried a different angle. Then lawful detention in Moonsteel quarters until we determine intent. No. Raven's reply came like a blade. Border law grants petitioning sanctuary pending formal trial. She entered under my witness. That law binds this council as it binds me. Trial now, Corvin snapped, stung by the rebuke. And if she refuses, chain her. Arabella felt the old reflex rise, the one that told her to make herself small, agreeable, invisible, anything to reduce impact. Her breath shortened. The room blurred at the edges. Raven took 1 step backward until his shoulder nearly touched hers. Not shielding her from sight. Anchoring. Look at me, he said softly. For her alone. She did. Stay standing. Then he faced the council again, aura hardening. I invoke trial law. Clause 9 of disputed bloodline and bonded claim. Judgment is moved to sunset at the sacred stone circle, under witness of rank and common pack, with challenge rights intact. Any attempt to confine, strike, or compel the petitioner before lawful hearing is treason against the alpha seat. Shock rippled through the tiers. Clause 9 was ancient, rarely used, politically explosive. It also stripped room for quiet murder. Corvin surged to his feet. You would drag sacred process into spectacle because you are besotted by a border stray? Raven's answer was colder than winter iron. I would drag rot into daylight where it cannot hide behind council benches. The white-haired elder studied him, then Arabella, calculation warring with caution. Sunset then. Public witness. So recorded, Raven said. A scribe at the lower desk, hand shaking, carved the ruling into wax slate. Proceedings fractured into procedural arguments about witness order, challenge boundaries, and security lines. Through it all, Raven remained a fixed point at Arabella's side, taking every accusation onto himself when speakers tried to root them at her. He did not let one question touch her directly. He did not command her to speak or silence her when she chose not to. Protection without possession. Power without the familiar cruelty. As council members rose and filed out in tense knots, Corvin passed close enough for Arabella to smell clove oil on his robes. She will break you, he murmured, eyes on Raven. Raven did not look at him. Leave before I decide that was a challenge. Corvin kept walking. The chamber emptied to echo and torch crackle. Arabella realized her shoulders had dropped from around her ears sometime in the last 10 minutes. She was still afraid. Of sunset. Of politics. Of whatever Blackridge had set in motion. But fear no longer stood alone. Raven turned toward her, expression exhausted at the edges, resolute at the center. You heard it. Sunset hearing. I can still move you to a hidden hold before then, if that is what you want. Arabella touched the fresh linen at her wrists, then the locket at her throat, then the place in her chest where the bond thrum answered when he came near. She met his gaze and, for the first time since dawn, did not brace for impact. I will stay, she said, with terms. Something like approval, almost fierce in its restraint, crossed his face. Name them. First, no cages, Arabella said. Her voice steadied as she heard it aloud. No locked room, no iron on my wrists, no being moved without being told where. Second, I keep the knife I came with. Not to threaten your people. To remember I still have a choice. Third, if your counsel questions me at sunset, I answer as myself, not through anyone else. Not even you. Raven held her gaze through each demand, then inclined his head once. Agreed. He reached into his boot sheath, drew out her plain stable knife, and offered it hilt first. Choice stays visible. She took it, surprised by the weight of gratitude and anger rising together in her throat. Gratitude because he honored the request without bargaining. Anger because one decent act felt miraculous only when the rest of her life had been built without it. A new voice cut across the chamber before she could respond. You negotiate with a fugitive in the council well now, Raven? The man descending from the upper tier moved with measured confidence, silver-threaded hair bound at his neck, ceremonial cloak clasped high, rings of office on 3 fingers. Older than Raven by at least 15 years, still broad through the chest, his smile polished and thin. Arabella recognized him from Blackridge whispers she had never believed in full. Magnus Ashford, elder kin to the Alpha line, keeper of right archives, the voice that opened most Holy Day ceremonies when Raven was away at war. Raven's shoulders went rigid. You were not called back into session. Neither was she. Magnus's eyes shifted to Arabella with devout disappointment arranged over hostility. Yet here we stand, rewriting procedure for a woman carrying contraband blood insignia. The scent reached her as he came closer. Clove oil. The same sharp trace that had clung to Corvin's robes minutes earlier. Raven took one step, placing himself between them without dramatics. State your business. My business is stability. Magnus spread his hands as though offering reason itself. Your border guards detain 2 intruders with forged seals and rune torches. Panic is moving faster than fact. The lower barracks are already saying you have been moonstruck into reckless rulings. I came to contain that. By calling her a fugitive in my hall? By naming what enemies will name by nightfall. Magnus tipped his head, expression sorrowful. If you will not cage her, at least allow right examiners to determine whether bond manipulation is present. Arabella felt heat pulse beneath her skin, not from the mate pull this time, but from old humiliation dressed in new language. You want me handled like contraband, she said, the words clean and sharp. Say it without velvet. Magnus looked at her as if she were a servant who had spoken over a dinner bell. I want this pack alive tomorrow. Raven's voice dropped, then leave my chamber and stop lighting fear for sport. Magnus's smile flattened. You forget who taught you Claw's Law, nephew. Sunset trials can crown or collapse thrones. If this woman is what her locket implies, every ambitious elder in the Confederacy will test your border before winter ends. I had not forgotten. Raven's gaze hardened to iron. I had forgotten how easily you confuse control with duty. Magnus held his stare another breath, then turned and walked toward the gallery doors. At the threshold he paused. For what it is worth, he said without looking back, I did not forge those letters, but I know who benefits if your judgment falters in public. When he left, the chamber felt colder. Arabella slid the knife into her belt and forced air into lungs that had tightened again. He knew exactly where to press. He always does, Raven said. That is why people mistake him for harmless. 2 guards entered with wax satchels and bowed. Raven broke the first seal, scanned the page, then passed it to Arabella. The script was cramped, urgent, and signed with marks rather than names. The sacrifice requires the Moonwell heir's blood on null runes before sunset. Circle charges in place. Witness class to be consolidated. First alpha rises when mate bonds fail. Arabella read it twice, unable to make her eyes accept what they were seeing. Moonwell heir, she whispered. They mean me. Raven opened the second letter, jaw tightening as he read. Purity oath roll. 63 signatures. Some are old retainers, some hold office. He met her eyes. Magnus said he did not forge the letters. He chose his words very carefully. He wrote them. Either him or someone inside his household archive with the same hand training. Raven looked toward the doors Magnus had used. And he came here to measure what we know. The crux settled into Arabella with brutal clarity. This was no longer one desperate woman trying to survive a false accusation. This was a power seizure wrapped in holy language, and her bloodline was the hinge. By the first afternoon bell, the keep courtyards had filled with small knots of wolves pretending not to gather. Raven moved Arabella through a side passage to an upper gallery overlooking the central square. Below, a temporary dais had been raised beside the old oath fire pit, and Magnus stood upon it in full right vestments, silver runes stitched along his sleeves, voice carrying to every corner of stone. Fear does not make us cruel, he was saying, hands lifted in practiced solemnity. Fear makes us vigilant. We remember what weak blood invites. We remember the old breaches. We remember that one compromised alpha can doom 7 valleys. Murmurs answered him. Some faces were fervent, some uneasy. Corvin stood near the front, chin high, as if this had always been the natural order of things. Magnus continued. At sunset we witnessed not only a trial, but a purification of law. The moon does not bless confusion. The moon blesses hierarchy, tested and unbroken. If enchantment has touched our alpha seat, we cut it out cleanly before rot spreads. Arabella gripped the gallery rail so hard her wrapped knuckles throbbed. He had not named her, yet every sentence pointed like a blade. He had not called for blood, yet the crowd heard blood all the same. Raven remained beside her, close enough that she could feel his heat through cloak and linen. "He is building consent for whatever he does next," he said. "If he can make brutality sound like duty, half the work is done." "And the other half?" "Convincing frightened people that mercy is treason." She looked at him then, really looked, at the restraint carved into his mouth. The old grief banked behind command. Attraction moved through her in a way that frightened and steadied at once. Not soft, not simple. It was drawn to the parts of him that refused easy cruelty even when cruelty would be politically convenient. "I am not healed because one man asked consent. I am not safe because a bond answered in my chest. I am standing above a square full of wolves who would sleep better if I disappeared. Still, when he stands near me, panic no longer owns every inch of my body. I hate how much that matters. I hate that trust feels like walking onto thin ice and finding it holds. I want to keep distance because distance kept me alive. I want to lean into the one presence that has not tried to rename me." Both truths sat inside me at once, and neither left. A runner reached the gallery, breathing hard. "Alpha, quartermaster report." 2 wagon crews switched routes without authorization. Said they were carrying torch oil to the stone circle. Inventory says no requisition filed. Raven took the slate from him, scanned it, and swore under his breath. "Where are the wagons now?" "Unknown. Last seen near the old burial slope." "Find them." Quietly. No alarm in the square. The runner bolted back down the stair. Arabella forced herself to speak through the pulse in her throat. "Explosives? Likely. Pitch kegs with rune salts can fracture half the circle if they are nested under the right seams." Raven turned toward the inner corridor. "Come with me." He led her to a narrow strategy room above the armory, walls pinned with boundary maps and old campaign markers. He barred the door, then pulled a wooden case from beneath the central table and opened it. Inside lay charcoal rubbings of the sacred stone circle, each slab numbered, fault lines marked. "Magnus oversees right maintenance," he said. "He knows exactly where to hide charges so they stay invisible until ignition." Arabella studied the rubbings. One line at the circle's southern quadrant had been marked in darker charcoal, then scratched over. "This seam," she said. "Someone changed this notation." Raven leaned in, shoulder brushing hers, both of them stilling for half a breath at the contact before returning to the map. "Good catch." A second knock sounded, coded and quick. Raven opened to Jory, mud-spattered and grim. "We found one wagon," Jory said. "Empty kegs, pitch residue, rune dust in the planks. Driver missing. Also this." He held up a bronze chain with a thumb trigger clasp at one end and char marks along the links. "Detonator rig." Arabella felt cold spread through her limbs despite the heated room. "They mean to kill the council and blame chaos on me." "Or kill dissenters and call it purification," Raven said. "Either way, it ends at the circle." Jory glanced between them. "We can cancel the hearing." "No," Arabella said before Raven could answer. "If he controls the story in public, he does not need the blast today. He waits and does it later with better cover." Raven watched her, something fierce and proud moving under his restraint. "She is right." Jory exhaled hard. "Then we lock down all approaches and sweep beneath every stone." "Do it," Raven said, "and place watchers on Magnus's private guard. If any of them move toward the circle with bundles, seize and record." When Jory left, Raven set both hands on the map table and bowed his head for one brief moment, collecting himself. Arabella stepped closer before fear could talk her out of it. "If I am the hinge," she said, "I do not hide behind a wall while he turns everyone else into kindling." His eyes lifted to hers, amber deepening with emotion he did not disguise this time. "Standing beside me at sunset will make you the first target." "I was already the first target at dawn." Silence stretched, weighted and intimate. Raven reached up slowly, giving her time to refuse, and adjusted the fur edge of her cloak where it had twisted at her throat. No claim in the touch. Just care. Deliberate and reverent. "I want to keep you breathing," he said, "then trust me with my own danger." He closed his hand once, then let it open. "All right." The last light bled toward copper as they descended to the lower court for the formal walk to the sacred stone circle. Warriors formed twin lines, shields on backs, spear points down in ceremony posture. Elders gathered under torchlight, murmurs running through their ranks when Arabella appeared at Raven's side with her chin lifted and the moon-sealed locket visible against her throat. Magnus waited at the head of the procession in dark white robes, face composed into solemn duty. Corvin stood near him. So did 6 men Arabella did not recognize, each with fresh linen wraps at the wrists like workers nursing rope burn. Not workers, she realized. Concealed cult marks. The procession moved through pine-shadowed paths toward the ancient clearing. Night wind carried damp earth, torch smoke, and beneath both, the mineral tang of rune salts recently disturbed. At the edge of the circle, Ashford sweep teams signaled all clear from the visible seams. Too clean, too quick. Then Arabella saw it. A novice acolyte kneeling near the sanctified fire pit, feeding thin bronze links into ash as if arranging ceremonial chainwork. His hands trembled. At his belt hung a matching thumb trigger clasp. "Raven," she said, low and urgent. "Fire pit, chain." He turned at once, but Magnus raised both arms and his voice crashed across the stone. "Witnesses of Ashford," he called. "By emergency right authority and in defense of the Alpha Line, I petition immediate containment of the blood-tainted claimant." At that signal, the 6 wrapped-wrist men lunged from the elder ranks, not at Raven, but at Arabella. Iron nets flaring open under torchlight, while the kneeling acolyte slammed his palm toward the detonator trigger beside the fire pit. The trigger clicked, a dry metallic snap that cut through Magnus's proclamation, and Arabella moved on instinct, not away from danger, but into the only line she could still influence. She drove her shoulder under the first iron net as it unfurled, took the weighted edge across her back, and twisted hard enough that the mesh dragged her sideways instead of pinning her flat. Pain burst along her ribs. The second net struck her knees and tangled, dropping her to one hand on the cold stone. Raven's roar hit the clearing at the same instant. Ashford warriors broke formation, torches toppled. One of the wrapped wrist men slashed at Jory with a short hooked blade. Jory answered with his shield rim, sending him sprawling into the outer ring. Corvin shouted for restraint, and then, when no one listened, for loyalty, his voice cracking under the surge of bodies and rank and panic. Near the fire pit, the kneeling acolyte yanked the bronze chain again. A pulse of red-orange rune light flashed beneath the southern stones, then stuttered, then flashed once more. Not a full detonation, a priming sequence. Magnus smiled as if he had expected the delay. "Contain her now," he barked. "Seal the center." 2 cultists lunged for Arabella's arms, iron cuffs swinging from their belts. Raven intercepted one with brutal economy. Forearm to throat, heel sweep, a controlled takedown that cracked breath from the man without finishing him. The second cultist reached Arabella first and caught her cloak. She ripped free, fur tearing at the seam, and crawled through netting toward the moon-carved center disc while boots pounded all around her. This was the crux, sharp and merciless. If she ran now, she might live the night while Magnus kept her bloodline as a weapon forever. If she stayed, She could break his ritual architecture in front of every witness, or die where everyone could see exactly why. I am shaking, and I am still moving. The old terror keeps saying, survive first, hide later, vanish if you can. That voice kept me alive in cellars and stables and ravines, and I honor it. But survival that leaves his story standing is not freedom. If I flee, he will crown himself with my absence and call it purity. If I stay, I choose the terms, even if they cost me everything. I am not clean, not noble, not untouched by fear. I am tired, scarred, furious, and done being carried as evidence by men who hate what I am. I choose the center. I choose the witness. I choose to be named by my own hand. She hit the center disc on her knees, dragged the stable knife from her belt, and sliced her palm in one clean pull. Blood welled bright against the steel. Magnus saw the motion and swore, dropping all pretense of solemn ritual. Stop her! Arabella slammed her bleeding hand onto the moon carving. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the old sigils woke. Silver fire raced through hairline channels in the stone circle, branching out in a pattern older than Ashford heraldry, older than Magnus's purity sermons, older than the council benches where men called cruelty procedure. Light climbed the standing stones in vertical ribbons and burst overhead into a pale lattice. Every wolf in the clearing staggered as pressure rolled outward. Not alpha force, not fear, but law invoked at source. On Magnus's followers, hidden marks ignited. The linen wraps at their wrists burned away in curls of ash as silver script surfaced beneath skin, each character naming oath and rank and right violation. Gasps rippled through the gathered pack. One by one, the wrapped wrist men froze, exposed in a language no forger could fake. Corvin stumbled back, staring at his own forearm as a smaller string of script appeared there too, enough to mark complicity if not full initiation. No, he whispered. No, that is not. Record it, Jory shouted to the scribes at the perimeter. Every mark, every name, now. The acolyte at the pit, wild-eyed and crying, hauled on the chain again. This time, the rune light under the southern seam flared hotter. Arabella lunged across the center ring, net still dragging from one ankle, and caught his wrist with both hands. He was younger than she had thought, barely out of adolescence, terrified and committed in equal measure. Let go, he choked. You first. He jerked the thumb trigger up between them. Arabella drove her forehead into his nose, hard enough to stun but not shatter. The trigger slipped. She tore the bronze chain free, spun on one knee, and hurled the entire rig into the sanctified fire pit. The clasp struck the inner stones, sparked, and dropped into blue-white ritual flame. Rune salts shrieked like wet iron plunged in forge heat, then went silent. Beneath the circle, the primed charges guttered out. Magnus's face changed, devotion burning off to reveal naked rage. You little gutter bread! Arabella rose, blood running down her wrist, and shouted in the old tongue stamped into her locket, and half-remembered from lullabies she had thought were only grief. By Moonwell law and witness rank, I call lawful challenge. Single combat. No proxy. No retreat. The words rang against stone and bone. The standing stones answered with a low harmonic hum. Challenge lines etched themselves in silver around Magnus and Arabella, a narrow dual ring within the greater circle. Any wolf crossing without sanction would trigger sanction backlash. Ancient safeguards. Brutal and clear. Raven hit the boundary and stopped, fists clenched, forced to hold. Magnus laughed once, disbelieving, and stepped into the ring as if entering a chapel to defile it. Black-veined runes spread from his cuffs up both arms. His pupils narrowed, fangs lengthened. Partial shift took him in jagged increments, muscle bunching under ceremonial robes that tore at the sleeves. You think blood makes you sovereign, he said. It makes you useful. She challenged. Raven said from the boundary, voice like stonefall. Fight or yield? Magnus spat at the ground. I do neither for servants. He lunged. Arabella ducked the first strike, claw tips grazing her shoulder through torn cloth, and slashed at his forearm with the stable knife. The blade sparked against rune-hardened skin and cut shallow. He backhanded her across the ring. She hit stone, tasted copper, rolled as his heel came down where her ribs had been. Around them, wolves shouted, some for Magnus, more now for law, for witness, for the terrible relief of seeing hidden rot dragged into open night. She got to one knee and felt the bond thrum through her chest where Raven stood straining against the challenge boundary, not helpless but bound by the same law he had invoked to protect her. That restraint was its own vow. I cannot match his strength. I cannot outclaw him. Stop trying to win his fight, win mine. He is anchored by those runes at his sternum, by the right he twisted. Break the anchor and the borrowed force collapses. Breathe. Angle. Make him commit. I am not a blade forged in a war hall. I am the knife that survived a stable bench, a border chase, a cellar life. Small does not mean weak. Small means precise. She rose fully, set her bleeding palm to the inner challenge line, and dragged a crescent smear across the stone, completing the blood circuit she had begun at center. Moonlight poured down through the lattice overhead, brightening the knife until silver licked along its edge. Magnus saw it and snarled. He came at her with both arms, overextended in contempt, aiming straight for her throat. Raven moved anyway, crossing the boundary at an angle that took the sanction burn across his forearm in a burst of white light, buying Arabella one heartbeat of space as he slammed Magnus offline. They crashed together, separated, and the challenge ring snapped back into place, forcing Raven out with a concussive shove that drove him to one knee outside the line. Magnus staggered, then regained footing, chest exposed for a fraction. He grinned through blood at the corner of his mouth. A servant pretending at queenship. Arabella stepped in. The silver-lit blade drove into the rune anchor at his sternum, not deep by length but exact by placement, piercing the carved nexus that fed every black vein crawling his arms. Magnus's breath hitched in shock more than pain. She held the hilt there with both hands and met his eyes. I was never yours to name. He tried to strike her again. His arm failed halfway, runes flickering out in broken segments. Raven surged forward as the ring destabilized, caught Magnus from behind, and pinned him to the altar stone at the edge of the circle, forearm across his upper chest, iron restraint without frenzy. Magnus's gaze found Arabella over Raven's shoulder, hatred sharpened to its final point. Prophecy dies with you. Raven's answer came low and absolute. No, it ends with you. Arabella pressed her bleeding palm over the shattered sternum rune and spoke the judgment clause the locket had guarded all these years, each word carrying through the clearing as if the stones themselves repeated it. Moonwell hears blood freely given. Moonwell rejects blood by coercion. By witness treason and broken right, I sever claim, seal oath, and return stolen power to the line of law. Silver light flared under her hand, then inward through Magnus's chest markings. The black-veined network fractured in branching cracks of pale fire. His body arched once, then went still as the heart rune broke apart into ash and light. Silence crashed down. No horn, no sermon, no forged certainty. Only wind through pine, the hiss of sanctified fire, and the ragged breathing of wolves who had just watched a dynasty of fear lose its center. Corvin dropped to his knees first, then two of Magnus's outer circle loyalists threw down their blades. Jory's unit moved in, binding marked cultists with moonsteel ties, while scribes recorded names from the still glowing script on their skin. At the southern seam, Ashford engineers pried up one stone and found the packed pitch kegs exactly where Arabella had warned they would be, runes chalked for synchronized ignition, now inert. Raven stood and turned to her, sanction burns smoking faintly along his forearm, eyes fierce with relief and reverence and something older than either. He did not touch her yet, not until she nodded once. Only then did he cross the final step between them. Raven crossed the final step between them and stopped close enough that Arabella felt his breath in the cold air, but he kept his hands at his sides. "Arabella," he said, voice unsteady for the first time that night. "The challenge is closed. The threat is ended. I will not take what is not offered. Before witness and law, do you consent to a claiming mark from me?" Around them, the circle stayed silent. Torches hissed. The standing stones still carried a faint silver pulse from Moonwell judgment, and every wolf in the clearing waited on her answer. Arabella looked at his forearm where sanction light had burned through skin and leather, then at his face, at the fierce restraint that never left him even now. She stepped forward, lifted both hands to his jaw, and guided him down until their foreheads touched. "Yes," she whispered. "Ask me as your equal." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, amber deep and clear. "Arabella Duskwalker, Moonwell heir, will you be my mate, my queen beside me, my law and my home?" The tight knot behind her ribs loosened all at once. She bared the junction of neck and shoulder, pulse jumping under skin, and answered with the steadiness she had fought for all day. "Yes, I will." Raven's hand settled at the back of her neck, warm and careful. He gave her one last heartbeat to pull away. She did not. His bite landed just below her pulse, sharp enough to steal her breath, pain flaring bright and immediate, then transforming as the bond surged open. Heat raced through her chest in gilded currents. The world did not vanish, but it changed texture, as if every sound now carried depth she had never been allowed to hear. She felt Raven's devotion strike through the new channel with startling clarity, protection without chains, hunger braided with reverence, a vow built from choice rather than force. A soft cry escaped her, not fear, not hurt, but release. Golden threads shimmered between them, visible even in torchlight, stretching from her sternum to his like living filaments of dawn. Raven lifted his head slowly, lips at her temple, breathing hard. "Mine," he murmured, the word rough with awe more than possession. Arabella touched the mark at her neck, then touched his chest where his heart hammered against her palm. "Yours," she said, "and you are mine." He gave a broken, relieved laugh that lasted one breath. She turned him with both hands, feeling the strength under his shoulders, and drew him down far enough to reach the shoulder curve where alpha marks were carried. "Hold still," she said, and there was the smallest flash of tension-breaking humor in her tone. "I have less practice than you." The corner of his mouth lifted even through strain. "I trust your aim." She bit through skin with deliberate pressure. He shuddered, a low sound torn from his chest as the reciprocal mark sealed. Silver gold light rippled outward across both their skin, tracing rune lines that matched and settled. The bond completed in a rush that nearly dropped her to her knees, not because it overwhelmed her, but because it filled spaces she had kept numb for years. She felt his memories in impression and emotion rather than image. A boy watching his mother questioned while wounded. A young alpha learning command as a shield. Long winters of loneliness hidden behind iron control. In return, she knew he felt hers. Cellar stone, rationed kindness, the moment she chose the center of the circle instead of escape. "Mates?" Raven said against her hair, voice shaking now without apology. "Mate," Arabella answered and held him tighter. For several breaths, neither moved. They simply stood inside the ring of witness with his cloak wrapped around both of them, letting the bond settle from blazing surge to steady thrum. No more jagged pulls, no more uncertainty. A constant, living presence at the center of her chest. When they finally turned outward, the first wolves were already kneeling. Jory stepped forward and struck fist to heart. My Alpha, my Luna Queen. The title rolled through the clearing in waves as rank after rank followed. Some voices fierce, some tentative, all audible. Even those who had doubted could not deny what the stones had witnessed. Raven did not release Arabella's hand. Record before acclamation, he ordered, command returning with clean edges. Evidence first. Scribes moved at once. At the fire pit, tongs lifted the warped detonator chain from sanctified coals and sealed it into an iron evidence box stamped with witness marks. Engineers hauled 3 pitch kegs from the southern seam, while clerks logged rune salts and fuse line lengths. The 2 forged letters and counterfeit Ashford seals were read aloud beside Magnus's body, then handed to the archive keeper under guard. Corvin, pale and shaking, was brought forward, the silver script still visible on his forearm. I carried his messages, he said, voice fraying. I told myself it was caution, not treason. The clove oil was his right marker. We all wore it when sworn. He looked at Arabella and could not hold her gaze. I will testify. You will, Raven said. And you will serve sentence where your harm can be measured, not hidden. Before moonset, the emergency council reconvened in the same chamber that had tried to cage her by procedure. The white-haired elder rose first, removed his torque collar, and set it on the bench. I failed my office through fear. I submit to review. One by one, witnesses gave account. Border guards on the horn calls, the quartermaster on the unauthorized wagons, Jory on the seized chain, archive clerks on handwriting matches from Magnus's private sermon drafts. The gray-haired healer testified to sanction burns and mark timing, confirming the claiming occurred after lawful challenge closure and by explicit consent. When Arabella spoke, she did not stand behind Raven. She stood beside him. I do not ask this council to forget what was done, she said. I ask that law stop being a mask for cruelty. Sanctuary must be real, or it is another word for bait. The vote was not close. By formal seal and witnessed clause, the council ratified Arabella Duskwalker as Moonwell heir and co-ruler of Ashford beside Raven. Corvin was stripped of office and assigned restitution labor under public record. Magnus's cult role became prosecution docket by dawn. On separate motion, the council entered formal redress on Arabella's Black Ridge persecution. Charges for unlawful bondage, attempted branding, and cross-border hunted seizure were filed against the Black Ridge steward and named officers. Witness writs, healer records, and seized correspondence were dispatched to the Interpac conclave with an extradition demand and sanction trigger. Arabella's persecution claim was recorded as resolved in law. The next morning, pale gold light spread over the same sacred clearing, now swept clean and ringed with fresh pine boughs instead of hidden chains. Wolves stood in ordered ranks, no whispers this time, only attentive silence. Arabella wore a dark gown reinforced for movement, the moon locket resting at her throat above the new mark. At her belt sat the stable knife in a plain sheath, not as threat now, but as history carried honestly. Raven faced her before the altar stone. I vow no hidden law, he said, each word carrying to the outer ranks. No rank above accountability, no claim without consent. I choose you in council, in battle, in quiet, in every dawn after this one. She answered, voice clear. I vow no more hiding. I will guard the vulnerable with the same ferocity I used to survive. I choose you not as shelter from myself, but as the one who saw me and did not look away. They pressed palms over the moon carving together. The bond answered with a warm, visible glow, steady and bright. Jory read the first royal decree immediately after. The Sanctuary Charter of Ashford, granting asylum rights to escaped servants and bloodline children, with independent auditors and healer oversight. The old Infirmary Tower Annex was designated as the first sanctuary house before the gathered pack. The gray-haired healer accepted charge of intake. Two former Black Ridge workers stepped forward to join her, and when Arabella saw Toma among them, shoulders still wary but chin lifted, she felt joy strike clean through old grief. He bowed awkwardly. She smiled and nodded once, and he smiled back, astonished by his own courage. As the ceremony closed, Raven took her hand and raised it. No one looked away. No one challenged. The pack knelt as one. Later, when the square emptied and only wind and distant stable sounds remained, Arabella and Raven stood on the keep's eastern wall, watching sunrise spill over the ravines she had crossed in terror less than a day earlier. His arm rested around her shoulders. Her head leaned against his chest. The bond between them had settled into a quiet, constant pulse. "No more chains," he said softly. She touched the mark at his shoulder through his cloak, then the one at her neck, and answered with a calm she had never known she could own. "No more hiding.